Hello.
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 Hi there.
Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com podcast, Doctor Who edition, part 2, because we're talking about Spyfall part 2. That's Doctor Who episode. I am Hugh Fullerton.
And I'm Morgan Jeffery.
And this week we're talking about, you guessed it, the thing I just mentioned 3 seconds ago, Doctor Who Spyfall part 2. The second episode we've had in less than a week, which is pretty great, right?
Yeah, and it was a lot of Doctor Who as well.
It was a lot of episodes, a lot going on.
It was a lot to take on, especially just a few days after part 1.
Yeah, definitely a lot to process. But that's why we're here. We're processing. We're, human computers. We're hard drives.
Nice.
It all ties together. But first, we should maybe talk about where we left off last episode. I was going to say last week, but it wasn't a week ago. There was a big cliffhanger. OMG, as we'd say, which is that the Master's back. We talked about that, in the last podcast, but this is the episode where we get to see Sacha Dhawan in action as the Master. And, what do we think?
Well, he's definitely got his own take on it. He's it's sort of a little bit more towards the manic side of the Master, some of which we saw in the John Sim interpretation. Also loves dressing up. Yeah. Loves an outfit. Does this
unnecessarily? I love the bit where he turns up at the Inventors Fair in like a full, sort of era-appropriate outfit and hat, and then immediately he starts shooting people with alien technology, thus rendering it pointless.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mentioned this a little bit last episode, but I really do think this is quite a sort of classic series influenced Master. Not so much in the way he's being played. I think Sacha Dhawan is kind of drawing a little bit on John Sim's portrayal, but in the way he's being written, right down to having the tissue compression eliminator. That's very classic Master. The sort of the dressing up is quite sort of 80s Master. But the whole scheme that the Master has in Spyfall is very kind of John Pertwee era Doctor Who. That Master making some sort of deal with an alien race that ends up, upending and they ended up turning on him. Yeah. That's pretty much every John Pertwee Master story.
And then at the end when he's trapped in another dimension going, Doctor!
I'll get you next time, Doctor!
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for these meddling you. So that was a lot of fun. We probably not the last we've seen of the Master, I'd say.
Certainly not. Well, part of what I really enjoyed about this episode actually was the arc building. It poses lots of questions and seems to really set up a very intriguing arc for Series 12.
Yes, and we will talk about that in a moment. But first, we should talk about Spyfall as a whole. We've talked about the Master. We've seen both parts of Spyfall now. I guess we could treat it as one story, or we can look at this and its own merits. What do we think? What do we like about Spyfall?
Well, I think it's interesting you said that, because I think it's tricky to kind of look at it as one big story, because although this is a two-parter, it's a two-parter with a twist, and part 2 is, there's a lot going on in part 2 anyway, but part 2 is very distinct also from part 1. You've got a different setting, or various different settings from part 1. You've got a different premise almost. And one slight issue I did have with this episode, part 2, is that the plot of the Kasaavin, who are not the Vord, sorry, fan theories, but the whole sort of plot of their plan to take over the world by turning the human race into hard drives, which I actually thought was quite an interesting idea, and everything that Daniel Barton, Lenny Henry's character, is up to, kind of fades into the background.
A little bit. I think it's interesting because there's a lot going on, but you kind of do just want to keep going back to the Master, don't you? Like when you're watching the episode, because he's the exciting character. And it's sort of, it feels like you could have almost split this episode into a few different episodes. I was saying that about, having Ada Lovelace, who I thought was really cool, and Noor Inayat Khan, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but basically a couple of cool historical figures. And I was a bit disappointed that, it was nice to see them in this episode, and I'm glad they got covered in some way, but it would have been quite cool to see, an individual Ada Lovelace episode, and now we probably won't, or at least not, not anytime soon. And it seems a bit of a shame to kind of have them as extra little characters in something like this.
Although, fact fans, the fourth Doctor did actually meet Ada Lovelace in a Big Finish story.
I did look it up. Believe what you want to believe. Maybe she's turned up later and earlier at the same time.
Yeah.
In very Doctor Who fashion.
But I think you're right in that either of those historical figures could have sort of propped up their own Doctor Who episode. Equally, the stuff that we were delving into in part 1 of Spyfall, with Daniel Barton and then the Kasaavin, that could have justified its own story. Again,
totally.
It was a really interesting concept. But as much as I loved the arrival of the Master and I enjoyed his involvement in this story, the big reveal at the end of part 1 kind of, it kind of meant that everything else, as I said, faded into the background, and the Master stuff was the most interesting stuff. I think that's what most fans will have been, tuning into part 2.
And the arc stuff that we mentioned before, like the fate of Gallifrey. and all that. Like, I think that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even the Doctor forgot about Daniel Barton at the end. He just sort of left. He just left. He did the same thing as wannabe President Robertson in the last series. He just sort of walked off.
Sauntered off at the end.
And it was fine. You know, I mean, maybe we'll see him again. Who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, it is a shame, I think, because as you say, those historical figures could have justified their own episode. I actually really enjoyed part one and was quite intrigued by the monsters. And I don't feel like this episode did them justice because it was having to spend so much time with the Master.
Yeah, I thought there'd be a big mystery to them. It seemed like it was setting them up to have this sort of dark secret, and then they kind of didn't. Like, it was just like, no, they are what they seem. They're just an alien we haven't heard of before. Yeah. Like, that's why I kind of like the whole Vord theory thing. I know it's a bit of a deep cut, but it didn't seem that likely. But at least it would have been kind of an interesting little twist, rather than they were just like, oh no, they are some aliens from another dimension. What dimension? No, just another one.
And I think, the thing to say as well is we did both enjoy Spyfall Part 2. The individual elements of it we all enjoyed. We wanted more of them, if anything. I just think this episode was a little busy for me. It was busy, wasn't it? Too much going on.
I mean, the thing you said earlier about it not feeling like it picks up from Spyfall Part 1, I find it interesting because I sort of know what you mean, but I also feel like all it does is sort of carry on Spyfall Part 1, in that it's like, I was thinking about, what's this episode about? And I'm like, well, it's just more of like them fixing what happened at the end. I know that sounds a bit weird because that's always what two-parters are, but I was thinking of like Peter Capaldi era, World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls are very distinct.
True.
Like, they're very different. They're telling very different stories. This was it was different, but like it was also the same. Like, it was basically the same, like kind of like you said, it was continuing the story of Spyfall and also doing 3 news stories at the same time.
And so the story of Spyfall Part 1 kind of got a bit lost in that, I think.
Anyway, no, it's pretty interesting. A lot of cool stuff for the fans. There was a little Logopolis reference, which I think you had a little issue with.
Well, so there's a moment where the Doctor and the Master are atop the Eiffel Tower, and they're sort of reminiscing about old times, and the Doctor mentions, oh, this is even worse than Jodrell Bank, which is the observatory in Cheshire, and I presume that's meant to be a reference back to Logopolis, which is the 4th Doctor's final story, and in that the 4th Doctor falls from a radio telescope after a battle with the Master and ends up regenerating, except that... Well, it gets very complicated because that scene actually takes place at the Pharos Project, which is represented by a model of Jodrell Bank after plans to film at the real Jodrell Bank fell through. Whatever the case, those scenes take place at the Pharos Project, not Jodrell Bank. So the Doctor and the Master, within Doctor Who continuity, never actually had an encounter at Jodrell Bank, at least as far as we know. So I presume that's meant to be a Logopolis reference, but I think that may be a slight goof from the production
I
team
hope
there.
somebody was fired for that blunder. But yeah, there were a few classic references as well. There was that. There was, obviously, we saw more of a tissue compression eliminator.
Yes.
What was the other one? There was another one.
Contact,
yes.
which I loved.
And I love a little nod which says, yeah, I can do classic too.
Yeah,
that was
nice,
fun. Yeah.
nice.
I'm enjoying Doctor Who kind of sort of delving back into those roots again a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, they did it a little bit last series, but not as much.
I don't know if it's necessarily a reaction to the reaction to last series, or if it was always part of Chris Chibnall's master plan to do this.
Master plan.
Yeah, nice. But definitely, last year was all very much about the fresh and the new. And, without treading over old ground, I do think it's a lot of fun seeing those classic elements pop up again this series.
Obviously, also, we spent a bit of time with the companions, or the Tardis team, or the fam, depending on how we're calling them. And I was thinking about it. I quite enjoyed Graham's sort of deadly tap dance with the laser shoes. That was quite a fun gag. And it was nice. Again, I've quite liked seeing them kind of on the back foot and kind of doing their own thing and sort of working without the Doctor. I feel like it's a better use of that large cast. However, I would also say that in this episode, I was thinking about it. I was like, I'm not really sure what they actually achieved.
Not a whole lot, I don't think.
I think they basically just went to where they were going to go anyway, and told everyone what their plans were. But I kind of enjoyed that. Like, they're all such sort of fun characters to be with, especially Bradley Walsh's character. And like, I enjoy spending time with them. And like I say, it was nice to see them striking out on their own. I kind of wish they'd had more of a way to stop the plane themselves. I know it wouldn't have been plausible, but the Doctor kind of going back in time to give Ryan an app to save them was a bit...
I'm not a fan of that whole, what I call sort of the Bill and Ted style of time travel, where you go back to
paradoxes.
You go back to fix something after you've already gotten out of it. I mean, and I know Doctor Who time travel rules are not the most robust at the best of times, but that really feels like a dramatic cheat to me. They did it once before in the Stephen Moffat era in Pandorica Opens Big Bang, where the Doctor, I think he let himself out of the Pandorica.
Yeah, and he's holding a mop and...
and he lets himself out of the Pandorica because he went back after he'd already gotten out of the Pandorica. That stuff bugs me. But no, I agree with you. I think, you know, something this did have in common with Part 1 was that it handled the having 4 leads a lot better than Series 11 ever did. You know, last time we saw them split into pairs, and this time they divided the Doctor into 3 companions and let them go off as a trio. And I just think the balance is better and the dynamic feels more thought through, and there's this real warmth now amongst all of them. You know, obviously last series you had to get over the hump of, you know, Graham and Ryan's relationship and how they got on, and now they just get on, and it's quite nice. Like you say, they're fun characters to spend time with. And
it's nice to see them kind of finally challenging the Doctor as well and asking her about her background. Because I thought it was quite unclear in Series 11 how much they knew about her, where she was from and stuff. And I like that they've sort of stated it in this series that they don't know very much.
Yeah, because there could have been off-screen conversations we weren't privy to.
There's a lot of off-screen adventures in the last series, actually. Like, especially very early on, like when by the time they even go to Rosa, they've been to a few places, I think.
But it's nice that there's this, I guess, this idea that initially when you're whisked away with the Doctor, you're just sort of caught up in the excitement of it all, and then only after a while do you stop once the sort of initial buzz has faded and go, wait, who are you, and can I actually trust you, and where are you from? And
exactly, yeah. No, I like that. And maybe the Doctor can't even trust herself. Because, as we learn in this episode, we learned a little bit in the last episode, not everything is as it seems with the Time Lords. We don't know exactly what yet, but the Timeless Child is back. The Timeless Child theory. Episode 2 of the 2018 series, they introduced an arc that was never spoken of again, the arc that dare not speak its name. But now it's back, the Timeless Child. We don't quite know what it is. But yeah, basically the Master kind of reveals to the Doctor that he discovered some terrible secret in Gallifrey's history about the founding fathers of Gallifrey, kind of something presumably to do with the Time Lord species as a whole and their history.
He seems to suggest that the Time Lords are not what they've been led to believe they are.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means, whether that means genetically or historically, you know, maybe they've done something in the past, maybe one of their founding fathers is actually kind of a bad dude. The Time Lords aren't great people anyway.
Right, and like one of the founding fathers in the classic series of Time Lord civilization was Omega, who turned out to be this, like, you know, homicidal maniac, and then you've got Rassilon, who turned out to be a homicidal maniac. And then a lot of bad dudes on Gallifrey.
So I mean, imagine how bad this must have been for the Masters to be like, you know what, this is the final straw.
Even worse than you thought.
And yeah, we don't quite know how this relates. It's the Masters says something about how we all secretly know it in our I don't remember if it was in our DNA or secretly in our minds. The idea,
it's kind of like a race memory thing.
Yeah, and they are slightly telepathic, as we see this episode. Jodie Whittaker does quite a lot of telepathic stuff, so they can kind of absorb stuff in a way we wouldn't be able to.
And it's based on the lie of the Timeless Child, whatever that means. And interestingly, when the Master mentions the Timeless Child, the Doctor has a little bit of a vision, part of which is a flashback to the previous mention of the Timeless Child from Series 11, but part of which is you get a quick blurred glimpse of a childlike figure, who I presume is the Timeless Child.
Yeah, which is quite interesting. So I assume we're going to be hearing more about that in the rest of the series. Possibly not for a week or two. They might give us a little break, a little rest at the Tranquility Spa, which is what the next episode's about. But yeah, no, I think this is definitely a theme that's going to get picked up on. I do think it's interesting as well that the Doctor avoids telling her friends that Gallifrey's gone, which is something very similar to something David Tennant's Doctor does to Martha. But within the episode, he's admitted the truth, and he sort of told her about it being blown up.
I mean, maybe she held off because, Gallifrey's gone now, but it'll probably be back.
Yeah. I mean,
how many times have they sort of destroyed Gallifrey and Gallifrey's vanished and then it's back? And then
I mean, the property prices must be absolutely dire. Imagine, oh no, Gallifrey's been destroyed again. I just bought a condo.
Although on a purely sort of nerdy note, I did appreciate that Gallifrey visually still resembled how it looked in the Capaldi era quite recently. They could have done it's a whole new era. They could have done a Gallifrey revamp. But they didn't. It looked the same, which I think lent that moment more power because you already know what it's supposed to look like.
And actually, Peter Capaldi spent a bit of time there, in one of his Hellbent. Yeah, he spent a bit of time, so you kind of have a vague idea of what it was like recently-ish.
Still orange.
Yeah, still orange. A lot of nice buildings. So it's all quite interesting. I mean, there's a lot to digest from this episode. Like we're kind of scratching the surface here. Like there's so much to talk about. We unfortunately don't have all the time in the world ourselves.
But I do I like that final reveal as well. Not just because of the sort of plot implications, but I also think it gives Jodie Whittaker something else to play.
It's true.
She gets to do a lot of the more fun side of the Doctor, and I feel like this series is going to dig into sort of the Doctor more as a sort of a haunted figure who's keeping a lot of secrets. The companions are now sort of picking at her and asking for, what is the truth of the Doctor, and she's. I thought she played that scene where she returns to Gallifrey and then the aftermath of that incredibly well.
I thought so too. And a lot of the sort of scenes we were wondering about in the trailer of her looking angsty and worried seem to come from this. And I mean, it's kind of interesting that the companions want to know the truth about the Doctor when the Doctor's kind of learning maybe she doesn't know.
Right,
maybe
exactly.
she doesn't know, and they're going to maybe find out at the same time as her. And maybe they won't like what they see. Who knows? I mean, it's been pretty mild so far, but there's been a little bit more tension. I mean, she's opened up a little bit. They've slightly lessened it a bit. But I feel like this tension between the Doctor and the companions and the danger they're getting in, I don't know. I feel like this could be a theme this year.
Yeah, and that, the last series touched on it a little bit at the end of series 11 with the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, which I can still barely say. But there was a little bit of tension between the Doctor and Graham.
Yeah.
And I thought again, Jodie Whittaker and Bradley Walsh actually played that out really well. So yeah, I'm actually looking forward to a little bit of tension amongst the fam this year. I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we have a longer wait for episode 3, which is called Orphan 55. The Doctor and co are going for some R&R at a spa, and obviously it doesn't go very well. We don't know exactly how, but some nasty monsters seem to be attacking. Allegedly,
some of the scariest we've ever seen.
Yep, that's what people keep saying. So, there's a lot to look forward to. You'll never see a wellness retreat the same way again. So, yeah, it should be exciting. And we'll be back chatting all things about the episode, probably talking slightly less about the Timeless Child next week. Although, who knows? Maybe we'll do a spin-off Timeless Child podcast.
Everything else is different, Series 12. Maybe this is going to be super arc-heavy this
Super
time.
arc-heavy. And I'd be okay with that, I love an arc. Yeah. But for now, without knowledge of that confirmed, we'll just have to love you and leave you. And I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffery.
And thanks for listening.